Thomas & Friends is one of the most loved and influential children's franchises of all time. Even almost 80 years after the first Railway Series story was published, dedicated fans of all ages find themselves drawn to the well-written, surprisingly mature, and beautifully crafted books and the early seasons of the TV show. But every good story needs good characters, and most stories have a main character. In the Railway Series books, it's been argued by some that the main character is Gordon, who kickstarts the first book and ends the series in retirement. For the TV show, most people would say it's pretty obviously Thomas. He's in the title, he's on all the posters, etc, etc. But I don't think either of those groups have it right. Today I want to talk about the real main character of both the books and the TV show. It's not Gordon, and it's not Thomas. It's not even an engine. It might not even be alive. It's a rock. It's a literal boulder. It sits on top of this mountain thing, and it falls down, and yeah. I'm not joking, actually. I legitimately think this guy is the main character of 42 books he doesn't even appear in, and the first 5 seasons of the show. I have some explaining to do. Boulder might not even be classed as a character. He only appears in one episode of the series, but I think he underpins everything that makes Thomas more than just an ordinary kids show, and I hope that I can help you see his significance. Now, it would make sense for me to start by talking about the episode he features in, Season 5's Rusty and the Boulder. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, we're going to start by looking at the big themes of the books and the show. It might seem like it doesn't link to this random rock at all, but it does. Bear with me, and all will make sense. Let's start by talking about what Thomas & Friends is really all about. Part 1. The Central Conflict Theory. Most kids' shows don't have one big theme, and if they do, it's normally a very safe big theme. Family or friendship, things that have been done before. The main theme of Thomas, both of the books and of the classic seasons, is something that isn't safe. It's not easy to put in a kids' show. The main theme of this talking train universe is time. Time. The old against the new, the outdated and the updated. This is evident right from the beginning. Wilbert Awdry and his son Christopher, I think it's fair to say, were obsessed with time. The very first story in the Railway Series is about an old engine, Edward, knowing he's still valued. The first story of the last book is about a once youthful engine, Gordon, finally retiring. The books loved this theme of time and age. They kept coming back to it. Older characters like Edward and Toby kept proving their worth. Newer models of engines like Diesel and Daisy were constantly put in their place. Gordon mourns the death of his brothers, the scrapping of steam engines on the mainland. The theme of time was at the heart and core of the Railway Series books. The TV show kept this going by adapting the original stories and then writing their own stories that focused on similar themes. Even after the classic seasons, when the show began to decline in quality, it was always at its strongest when it went back to this theme of time. The island of Sodor itself is also incredibly important when we consider this. Have you ever noticed just how many long-lost locations and characters are rediscovered in this show? Can we get a montage going? It's crazy. Thomas & Friends has changed so much from where it was in the 80s, through model work into CGI into whatever this abomination is, but at least until very recently, the theme of time has, ironically, always been there. But if we focus specifically on the books and the first 5 seasons, I think the overarching story is something more than just a commentary on how things change. I think these stories are stories about a war.
Yes, it's war!
I'm suggesting that across the books and early seasons, we see a battle playing out between the decaying power of time and the preservative power of memory. Some engines are forgotten, lost forever. Whether that's because of scrap or their own stupidity, we can describe this as them dying to time. Think of Gordon's brothers, or Smudger, or Godred, or the engine on the old iron bridge who died in the ravine below. Think of the engines shown in this scarring picture. But then, there are also engines who are remembered. Henry gets out of the tunnel, Duke is found in his shed, Toby finds Bertram, Thomas finds Victoria. These are victories for memory, not for time. One of the main ways that time tries to remove these engines from history is through scrap and the oncoming power of the diesels who are taking over British railways. Think of Oliver, chased by diesels who are so evocatively described as baying and growling like hounds, or of Diesel, who describes himself very simply as revolutionary. The ominously named Other Railway is treated like enemy territory. Lines like this:
"Everyone knows that tenders are a mark of distinction, but I'm afraid that no amount of tenders will save you in the end,"
say it all. Sodor, therefore, is something of a timeless haven, pitted against the darkness of the Other Railway. Even well into the era of dieselisation, older designs of engines like Edward still work on that island. And Sodor is never described as a heritage railway in the books, it's just treated as a normal working railway line. Listen to this wonderful monologue by the Fat Controller as he addresses the survivors of this war on time.
"Please tell everyone," he went on, "that whatever happens elsewhere, steam will still be at work here. We shall be glad to welcome all who want to see and travel behind real engines."
Sodor is Audrey's vision of an isolated pocket of England that hasn't moved on, that's kind of frozen, safe and snug in the olden days. This is why when Diesel shows up, or when engines like the Old Iron Bridge Ghost are lost, it's scary. The timeless nature of Sodor is shattered, just for a second, as these visitors from the real world break in. So, Classic Thomas is about a war between time, which has its HQ on the Other Railway, but sometimes comes to Sodor, and memory, which has its HQ on Sodor, but sometimes goes to the Other Railway. I promise we're going to get to Boulder soon, but finally I want to make the case that nowhere is this war on fuller display than in Season 5. If Season 5 could be summed up in a few words, it would be lost and found. All the different strands of this time and memory conflict I keep talking about pop up here. You've got roads versus rails in Horrid Lorry and By George, the theme of scrap in Old Slow Coach, the theme of undiscovered railway lines in Haunted Henry, the recovery of a long-lost engine in Toby's Discovery, and straight-up depictions of death in Duncan Gets Spooked. In one image, Season 5 is this: an engine under threat from time. Remember this image, by the way, because it's going to show up again later. But I think there's one episode of Season 5 that plays with this theme more than any other. At last, I'm talking about Rusty and the Builder. Part 2. The Manifestation Theory. I'm going to preface this whole section by saying that I have no idea how much of this was intentional. But intentional or not, I think there is a real symbolic beauty to this episode, and I don't think accidental beauty should be ignored. With that in mind, Boulder is the literal manifestation of time. Boulder is the literal manifestation of the destructive side of time. I want to show you how, and because this video can't get any more pretentious than it already is, we'll do it by analysing this episode to death. We have a lot of questions to answer, but stick around because at the end I have a theory on why Boulder is so destructive, particularly towards Rusty, that you will not believe, in a good kind of way. Anyway, let's talk about the episode. The episode begins with Boulder. It doesn't begin with Rusty or anyone else. This is an episode about Boulder. And the most key phrase within these opening lines is the fact that
"It had stood alone for a long time."
this is a rock that has been up there for decades, centuries perhaps. But that doesn't stop Sir Topham Hatt ordering a new quarry to be constructed there. And here is the fascinating thing. I've read a few posts and comments where people think that Boulder represents nature. Now, I don't think that is quite right, but I do think they make an interesting point, in that in this episode, industry is portrayed negatively. Think about how rare that is. On Sodor, industry is generally a good thing. When Duck's branch line is built, that's a real high point. When the Mid-Sodor's industry collapses, that's a sad thing. Industry is viewed as valuable. And that makes sense. At the end of the day, industry is what keeps the engines alive. But here, the quarrying is not presented as good. Far from it. It's also worth thinking here about a character that nobody else ever seems to discuss. Thumper. Thumper is a machine that supposedly...
It helps collect the rock faster.
Thumper, in this sense, represents progress. He's more efficient, he leads to less work for the men involved, and he's viewed as the future. Now, who does that sound like? Even more than this, the narrator tells us that after a few days,
the quarry was filled with more machines.
More machines, more efficiency, we need more rock. We can't think about this land that is so much older than we are. We need to mine. Something tells me Rusty might be right when he surmises that this slab of rock thrown down from the cliff isn't an accident, but a warning shot. If we do read the story this way, and we say that the mining operation makes Boulder, or Time, angry at the lack of respect it's being shown, the whole way we see Sodor changes. Maybe Time only made corpses of Gordon's brothers, for example, because it was under attack. Maybe some of the husks of engines that we see in the scrapyards are those who never really bothered to respect Time, who took their lives for granted, and were ultimately reminded that they too were mortal. It's interesting that Boulder is, well, a boulder. He's not an engine, not steam or diesel, he doesn't take sides. In the words of Treebeard from Lord of the Rings, he is on nobody's side because nobody is on his side. He doesn't discriminate between narrow gauge and standard gauge, he just rampages down the line in an act which, I think, is one big warning. The quarry, which valued efficiency above all else, which was trying to save time, is attacked and destroyed by time itself. Finally, for this point, there's this beautifully written section at the end of the episode.
Rusty is sure that on a clear night it is gazing up at the mountain, and that its sighs are being carried on the wind to where it once used to stand, proud and silent.
Boulder is this furious force of fire and vengeance, right? So why is the end of the episode so melancholy, so calm and poetic? Again, I think this is a strong piece of evidence that Boulder does represent time. If this was just a story about a big rock which offered an opportunity for some fun stunt shots, I don't think it would end like this. We've seen stories like that before in this very season. Toby and the Flood springs to mind. And that otherwise dark story ends on a very cheerful, face value kind of note. Whereas here, no, there's something more going on here. And to understand what's going on, there's one more thing we need to explore. Part 3. The Vengeance Theory. Right from the start of the episode, it's clear that Rusty views the boulder as sentient. So does the narrator. After the opening, it's only ever referred to as Boulder, not the Boulder. More than that, it has a face in some shots. Whether or not that's Rusty hallucinating is left up to us to decide. What can't be hallucination, however, is the fact that the boulder frickin' teleports.
Oh no, it's behind
And that,
us.
to me, is one of the most overlooked aspects of the whole episode. This is going to blow your mind, so get ready. I said earlier that Boulder doesn't discriminate between who it targets. And that is kind of true. We see it going after Rusty, Rheneas, Skarloey. But this teleportation shows that there is intention there, of a possibly supernatural sort. The boulder, in this scene at least, does seem to be chasing Rusty, specifically. Now, whether intentional or not, Rusty was the perfect choice for this episode, and the perfect choice for Boulder's target. Why? TV Tropes claims that Rusty has done nothing to provoke the boulder. Well, I say wrong. Rusty has provoked time. The very thing that the boulder is, Rusty has spat in the face of. In two ways. So firstly, in the previous episode, Duncan Gets Spooked, he is the one to recount the tale of the ghost on the Old Iron Bridge, and he takes great relish in telling this story. A story which enshrines this forgotten engine in the memory of Duncan, something that Time/Boulder would not have been happy with. Time does not want his victims to be remembered. Secondly, and this is where the theory gets crazy, Rusty has defied time in a far greater way than just telling Duncan a story. In Season 4, Rusty travels to the other railway and sets Stepney free, rescuing him from the clutches of time. Stepney, from that moment, is an engine who should not be alive. He should be lying forgotten in a scrapyard. Time views Stepney as rightfully belonging to him. And in Season 5, Time tries to retake Stepney. Stepney almost dies in the smelter's yard underneath the claw, and Time almost gets him back. This also perfectly explains that really weird line that Ari says,
Got you this time, Stepney.
this time? That implies there was a time before. Perhaps Ari and Bert, like Boulder, are representatives of time itself. It's as though they were there in that scrapyard when Stepney was stolen away. But it gets better. Because, of course, in Stepney Gets Lost, the Fat Controller steps in and saves the day. And time, from that moment, I think, is furious at him too. Now there are two guilty parties, Rusty and the Fat Controller. Both have aided in the escape of an engine who time was so close to killing off. And that is why the Boulder, time itself, attacks Rusty and the Fat Controller in this single episode. It attacks Rusty physically, and it attacks the Fat Controller economically by destroying his quarry. Boulder, time, whatever you want to call him, exercises vengeful justice for the escape of Stepney by attacking those who set him free. That's certainly not intentional on the part of the writers, but who cares? It fits together so perfectly.
Saving you from scrap is getting to be a habit, Stepney. Please stop it.
In conclusion, so that's why I think the real main character of Thomas and Friends is actually a rock. The rock is a concept, the concept of vengeful time. And since time is the main theme of the franchise, that makes this guy the main character. Whether or not you buy the crazy Stepney theory, it's difficult to deny that Boulder does seem to represent an avenging force. A lot of people think it's nature fighting back, and I think that might have been the intention in the way that the episode was written, but I find my solution a bit more poetic. Maybe this is a bit dark, but I actually think there's something quite prophetic about Rusty and the Boulder, in light of what Thomas has become. The brand, as it stands, has absolutely no respect for time, no respect for legacy, and they're completely transparent about that in their interviews, actually. They are the mining company, quarrying at the rock without looking up. But maybe this community of weird talking choo-choo fans who to the outside world should have grown up by now, maybe we are the Boulder. Maybe we are the warning that those corporations need. In the words of one Christopher Audrey, Thomas, we feel, has a crown, and it is worth fighting for. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the theory analysis thing. I can't answer all the questions about this episode, of course. The fact that they used Gordon's face for Boulder could just mean that the Unlucky Tug is right, and that Gordon really is the main character of all this, and he possessed a rock to try and kill Percy or something. We may never know, and frankly I've spent so long overanalyzing this one episode that I just can't take any more. Random side note, while I was researching for this video, I found out that there's a truly bizarre amount of Boulder merchandise available. Like, look at this, you've got Wooden Railway Boulder, Take Along Boulder, you've got Play Rail Boulder, there's a bag with Boulder on it, you can get a Boulder trading card with full-on lore on the back, there's a Boulder plushie.
Oh no, it's heading straight for me!